She stopped to help a stranger whose car had broken down on a quiet road, never imagining that this simple act of kindness would lead to a job offer that would transform her entire life from struggling waitress to successful businesswoman. But the journey that followed tested everything she believed about herself, and the man she helped that day had a secret reason for being on that road, a reason that would connect their lives in the most unexpected way. And what happened next proved that sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be at exactly the right moment. Sarah Mitchell wiped down the last table at the diner, her feet aching from another 12-hour shift. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 at night, and the only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. She untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the kitchen door, and grabbed her worn jacket from the back room. The tips tonight had been decent enough to cover groceries for the week, but the rent was due in 3 days, and she was still $200 short. Her manager Tom had already left, giving her the keys to lock up like he did most nights when she worked the closing shift. Sarah turned off the lights, one by one, checked that the coffee makers were unplugged, and stepped out into the cool October air, locking the door behind her. Her car was parked at the far end of the lot, a 15-year-old sedan that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour, but it ran, and that was all that mattered. She slid into the driver's seat, tossed her purse onto the passenger side, and started the engine. The radio crackled to life, playing some late-night talk show that she barely listened to. As she pulled out onto the main road, the drive home took 20 minutes through quiet streets and past closed shops. Her apartment was in an older part of town where the streetlights flickered and the buildings needed paint, but the rent was cheap, and her neighbors mostly kept to themselves. Sarah was thinking about what she could make for dinner tomorrow with the leftover chicken in her fridge, when she saw the car on the side of the road, about 2 miles from her apartment. The hood was up, and a man stood beside it, holding a flashlight and looking under the engine. She slowed down, her first instinct telling her to keep driving. It was late, and she was alone, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he looked so frustrated, or maybe it was because she remembered the time her own car had broken down on this same road, and no one had stopped to help. She pulled over about 20 feet ahead of his car and rolled down her window. The man looked up, surprised to see someone stopping. He was probably in his late 50s, wearing a suit that looked expensive even in the dim light of her headlights. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he had the kind of face that belonged in a boardroom, not on the side of a deserted road. He walked toward her car cautiously, as if he did not want to startle her, and stopped a few feet from her window, keeping a respectful distance. Sarah leaned out slightly and called over the sound of her idling engine, asking if he needed help. He smiled a tired smile and said his car had just died on him. No warning lights, nothing, and now it would not start at all. He had already called for a tow truck, but they said it would be at least an hour, maybe more. His phone battery was almost dead, and he had an important meeting first thing in the morning that he could not miss. Sarah glanced at the time on her dashboard. It was almost midnight. She knew she should probably just wish him luck and drive away, but instead she heard herself offering him a ride to wherever he needed to go. The man hesitated, clearly weighing whether it was appropriate to accept a ride from a stranger at this hour, but then he glanced back at his dead car and nodded gratefully. He said he lived about 30 minutes away, in the opposite direction from where Sarah was headed, but if she could just drop him at a hotel nearby, he would be incredibly grateful. Sarah told him to get in, and he quickly grabbed a briefcase from his car, locked it, and slid into the passenger seat of her rattled old sedan. As she pulled back onto the road, the man introduced himself as Richard Caldwell. He apologized for the inconvenience and thanked her again for stopping. Sarah told him her name and said it was no trouble. She had been in the same situation before and knew how stressful it could be. Richard settled into the seat, and they drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he asked what she did for work. Sarah told him she was a waitress at the diner they had just passed and had been working there for about 3 years. Since she moved to town, Richard asked if she enjoyed the work, and Sarah laughed, saying it paid the bills, but it was not exactly her dream job. She explained that she had actually gone to college for business management, but after her father got sick, she had to drop out to help take care of him, and by the time he passed away 2 years ago, she was too far behind on her student loans to go back. She had been working at the diner ever since, trying to save up enough to maybe take some online classes or find a better job, but it was hard when every paycheck went to rent and bills. Richard listened carefully, not interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then He said something that surprised her. He said she had a kind heart, and that said a lot about a person. He told her that he owned a company, a manufacturing business, that made packaging materials for large corporations, and he was always looking for good people, people who were reliable, hardworking, and honest. Sarah laughed nervously, thinking he was just being polite. But Richard continued. He said he had a position opening up in his office, an administrative assistant role that would involve coordinating schedules, managing communications, and helping with project logistics. Nothing that required a specific degree, but it did require someone organized and dependable. Sarah glanced over at him, unsure if he was serious. Richard pulled out his wallet and handed her a business card. It was simple white with black lettering that read Caldwell Industries, Richard Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer, followed by a phone number and email address. He told her to call his office on Monday morning and ask for his assistant Helen. He would let Helen know to expect her call, and they could set up an interview. Sarah took the card, her hands shaking slightly. She thanked him, but said she did not have much office experience and was not sure she would be qualified. Richard smiled and said, experience could be taught, but character could not, and from what he had seen tonight, she had plenty of character. They arrived at a hotel near the highway, and Richard thanked her again before getting out. He said he hoped she would call, and that he looked forward to hearing from her. Sarah watched as he walked into the lobby. Then she looked down at the business card in her hand. Part of her thought it was too good to be true, that maybe he was just being nice and nothing would come of it, but another part of her felt a flicker of hope that maybe this was the break she had been waiting for. She drove home, her mind racing with possibilities. When she got to her apartment, she put the business card on her kitchen table where she could see it, and spent the next 2 days debating whether to call on Monday morning. She woke up early, showered, and dressed in the one professional outfit. She owned a simple black skirt and white blouse that she had worn to her father's funeral. She stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the business card, and finally picked up the phone. Her heart pounding as she dialed the number, woman answered on the second ring with a friendly voice saying, Caldwell Industries, how may I help you? Sarah asked to speak with Helen and was put on hold for a moment before another woman picked up. Helen introduced herself and said Richard had told her to expect Sarah's call. She asked if Sarah was available to come in for an interview that afternoon at 2 o'clock. Sarah agreed, trying to keep her voice steady, and wrote down the address Helen gave her. The office was in a modern building downtown with glass walls and a sleek lobby that made Sarah feel underdressed and out of place, but the receptionist greeted her warmly and directed her to the 3rd floor, where Helen met her at the elevator. Helen was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and a kind smile, who immediately put Sarah at ease. Sarah to a conference room, and they sat down to talk. Helen explained that the position involved managing Richard's counter, setting up meetings, coordinating with department heads, and handling correspondence. It required good organizational skills, the ability to multitask, and a professional demeanor. Sarah answered Helen's questions as honestly as she could, talking about her time at the diner, how she managed busy shifts, handled difficult customers, and kept track of orders and inventory. Helen seemed impressed, and after about 30 minutes, she said she would like Sarah to meet with Richard before making a final decision. Richard came into the conference room a few minutes later, wearing a different suit, but with the same warm smile. He shook Sarah's hand and asked how she had been since their encounter on the road. Sarah thanked him again for the opportunity and said she was excited about the possibility of working for his company. Richard asked her a few questions about how she handled stress, whether she was comfortable learning new software, and what her long-term goals were. Sarah spoke honestly, saying she wanted to build a career, learn new skills, and eventually finish her degree. Nodded thoughtfully, and then he said something that surprised her. He told her that the reason he had been on that road that night was because he had been visiting his brother, who lived in a small town about an hour away. His brother had been diagnosed with cancer, and Richard had been driving back late after spending the evening with him. He said that when his car broke down, he had felt frustrated and alone, and then Sarah had stopped, and her kindness had reminded him that there were still good people in the world, people who helped others without expecting anything in return. He said that was the kind of person he wanted on his team. Richa offered Sarah the job right there, with a salary that was nearly double what she made at the diner, plus health benefits paid, vacation, and opportunities for advancement. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, and she accepted immediately. Helen walked her through the paperwork, and told her she could start the following Monday. Sarah left the building, feeling like she was floating. She called her best friend from the parking lot and told her everything, barely able to contain her expression. The next few months were a whirlwind. Sarah learned quickly how to manage Richard's schedule, coordinate with different departments, and handle the steady flow of emails and phone calls. The work was challenging, but she loved it. Richard was a patient boss who took time to explain things and encouraged her to ask questions. The other employees were friendly and welcoming. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was building something that mattered. About 6 months into the job, Richard called Sarah into his office one afternoon and told her that he had been impressed with her work. He said she had a natural talent for organization and communication, and he wanted to give her more responsibility. He asked if she would be interested in taking on a project management role, helping to oversee a new client account that was launching in a few months. Sarah was nervous, but she agreed, and Richard arranged for her to take some online courses in project management, paid for by the company. The new role pushed Sarah out of her comfort zone, but she thrived. She worked closely with the sales team, the production department, and the clients themselves, learning how to manage timelines, resolve conflicts, and keep everyone on the same page. The project launched successfully, and the client was so impressed they signed a long-term contract with Caldwell Industries. Richard publicly praised Sarah's work at a company meeting, and Sarah felt a sense of pride she had not experienced in a long time. As the years went by, Sarah continued to grow within the company. She was promoted to senior project manager, then to director of operations, and eventually to vice president of business development. She finished her degree through night classes and earned an MBA through an executive program that Richard encouraged her to pursue. She bought a house, saved money, and built a life that she had once thought was impossible. But through it all, Sarah never forgot that night on the side of the road when a simple act of kindness had changed everything. She made it a point to help others whenever she could, mentoring new employees, volunteering with local nonprofits, and always stopping to help someone in need. Richard became not just her boss, but a friend and mentor, and when he eventually retired, he told Sarah that hiring her had been one of the best decisions he had ever made. Years later, Sarah was sitting in her own corner office at Caldwell Industries, looking out at the city skyline, when she received a call from a young woman who was stranded on the side of the road with a flat tire. Sarah did not hesitate. She grabbed her keys and drove out to help, and as she changed the tire for the grateful young woman, she thought about how one moment of kindness could ripple forward in ways you could never predict, and she smiled, knowing that she was passing on the same gift that had been given to her all those years ago on a quiet road when she stopped to help a stranger and found her future waiting.